Hey, what's up, guys? We have Jacob here to talk about AI, futurism, science, space, maybe a little bit of physics and consciousness. So, how's it going today, Jacob? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to be on here. I think you've got some interesting topics that you wanted to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Cool, thanks, man. Yeah, and so for anyone who's listening, this is going to be audio only. If I do post this to YouTube, then you can find me also on the audio podcasts such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those. I just wanted to make sure that people, if you do watch this on YouTube, you know to go there too. So yeah, Jacob, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself first, so we know who you are?
Absolutely. So, professionally, I am a chemist. I also have a background in chemical engineering. But what actually brought me on the podcast today, of course, is that run my own podcast called Entropy Rising, where we talk about science, futurism, space, all that kind of stuff. And that's what ended up bringing me on here with you today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I checked out your podcast a little bit beforehand. It sounds really good. Like it sounds like really professional. And it's you and one other guy, right?
Yes, that is my co-host Lucas. So it's just us. I appreciate the compliment. We try very hard to make it sound good. It is relatively new. We've only got one episode posted as of recording today. We have two episodes recorded, and the next one will be released tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. When I checked, I saw that it was only one. And so yeah, so where did you go to college? You majored in chemistry and engineering. Where did you go to college?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree in North Carolina. It's called East Carolina University. Perhaps some people have heard of it. If not, it's not a huge school. And I got my engineering degree at North Carolina State University.
Okay, cool. And so now are you mostly like an engineer over at chemist or
Uh,
kind of both?
Yeah, I'm an R&D scientist at a pharmaceutical company. So I work on kind of bringing drugs from the bench and then scaling them up for release and production.
Okay. How hard is that job? Like being like it's like a kind of like a pharmaceutical tech kind of thing?
Uh yeah, no. So my job title is just a research scientist. It's not, I would say, a very hard job. It's mostly just tedious. A lot of the sciences can be, I think, very tedious. It's not as it's depicted on TV or anything like that. It's mostly just performing the same types of tests over and over and over again to make sure you have enough data to do statistical analysis on. And it can be quite boring sometimes.
Yeah, I had a friend on actually who was on here for a bit on this podcast, and he was a I guess it would be called a biotech or whatever you call that, similar to what you're doing. And he was working for one of the big ones in LA. I'm like Amgen, I think he like moved out here from Chicago and then he worked for Amgen. Have you heard of Amgen?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he worked for them and it I don't really know exactly what happened, but it sounded like it was kind of like a um difficult or maybe stressful. He's now like a salesman, and he does really good at being a salesman. But it's I don't really know too much about it. It sounded like it was kind of stressful or something. But and that's why I asked. But so yeah, we'll just start off with AI, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, how much do you know about AI, and like what are your what kind of stuff uh are you interested in AI? What kind of stuff do you guys talk about? Like on I noticed the first one was I think actually was AI and
Yeah.
futurism, right?
Yeah. So
So yeah,
our first episode, we talked about AI, and we specifically talked about if AI can make an ideal ruler, because there's so much greed and corruption, and no ruler is going to be perfect. But if you've ever read any of Plato's philosophy, he had this idea of a philosopher king, which was this idealistic, perfect ruler who was incorruptible and wanted nothing but the betterment of his people. And even Plato said that that was an impossible idealism. No one would ever be like that. But my co-host and I, we really think, or we feel like AI could potentially fill that role in, the most optimistic outcome of AI advancing, and it really could be something to lead us to a better future potentially.
yeah. So like instead of having like this whole voting process for Trump and Kamala, having just like an AI kind of god type that like or like a perfect AI and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
just say who either appoint someone or they would just actually be the leader themselves.
yeah, exactly. Maybe they would be the leader, or something we also talked about was perhaps if we end up, are you familiar with the idea of the singularity, where AI essentially becomes conscious?
Yeah.
So if we ever have a singularity point and an AI gets created on the back end that, it's not like world news, it could potentially behind the scenes sway the political processes to bring us to an idealistic future, maybe without people even realizing that AI was playing a hand in all this stuff all along.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, how close do you? Well, I just read recently that like Sam Altman said we're like a year away from having AGI, right?
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
I don't know. It's tough. So right now we're seeing an exponential, curve in AI's functionality and AI's growth, but I really don't know if that exponential is going to continue. I think we're probably going to start seeing the rate of change slow down a little bit and probably level off. I think a year might be optimistic, but I mean it's really hard to tell because we don't fundamentally understand what consciousness is and what an artificial general intelligence is. And Sam Altman's idea is probably just that if we keep training these models and more data and give them more and more computational power, it'll just happen by itself. And we just don't know if that's true.
Yeah. So as far as the singularity thing, like, well, for one, do you think? Well, for one, a lot of people say like it depends on how you define singularity, and it sounds like you defined it by saying that it's when AI becomes conscious. Is that exactly how you would define it? That's the main thing
Yeah,
for
that's
singularity.
that's that's what I think of as far as the singularity.
But other people I've heard say that it's like when things get, it's kind of like a black hole where like when things get so crazy that like you don't know what's gonna happen next, I guess, or like it just kind of like right, like
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're almost there now.
yeah, yeah, and like there's so much talk about like that basically how we're everyone's kind of like going crazy and like um it's kind of like hard to keep up with stuff.
Hmm.
And obviously I do find that I kind of like when people say things are so bad and things are so crazy, I kind of tend to be like, oh well, they were always crazy.
Yeah.
We're just kind of we're just like learning about them faster and faster. Like as of right now, we're probably learning about everything that's happening within a day, probably, right? You probably see it on your phone.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've
But
got
like 100 years ago, it was probably just as bad or worse, right? I mean,
yeah,
in terms of living situations. Yeah.
probably worse, I would say. I mean, that's the thing. You don't hear about it. You didn't hear about it back then. And also, if you've only got a limited area, if you're making a newspaper, you can only put so much on that paper. So a lot of stories are going to be dropped. Whereas the internet, every little minor thing is going to end up on the internet. And we're constantly scrolling and consuming this media. So we see so much more of what's going on.
Yeah. And the only way to avoid it is like basically put your phone down, which is probably, sometimes the best thing to do is just to put your
Absolutely.
phone down, right?
It is, but sorry about that. It is, but it's also this issue of you have to be connected to function in our society today. You can't find a job without being on a phone, right? You almost need to have a LinkedIn account, a social media presence just to participate in society. So it's hard to disconnect.
Yeah. And so, as far as the AI becoming sentient, so like, do you believe that it will become
I,
sentient?
I see no reason why that couldn't happen. I do 100% believe we will eventually reach a sentient AI because I don't feel like consciousness is some special thing that can only happen through biology and evolution. I see no reason why we can't also create a technological consciousness. So, yes, I think we will eventually achieve that, or I at least think it's physically possible.
Yeah. So getting into that, that actually kind of like goes with the consciousness thing, which is like if if you it's like I'm gonna have a really hard time framing this, but like basically if you believe in material, if you're like a materialist, which I'm assuming that you are, like do you know the difference between like material and the only reason why I'm stating this is because I like just recently listened to like Donald Hoffman. Have you
Hmm.
listened to Donald Hoffman at all?
I have not. No, I'm not familiar with that term either.
Okay. So I'm going to do a very, very bad job at explaining this. But materialism is essentially, and I'm only explaining this to you so you can tell me what you think about it. But like materialism is essentially like when I knock on this table, I believe like this table is really here.
Okay.
And, not only is it really here, but the particles are really here. It's made up of a bunch of, you would know about this because you're a chemist. It's made up of a bunch of particles and atoms and whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's idealism, which is we are living inside of consciousness, essentially kind of like, and this is what Donald Hoffman believes. If you ever get a chance, go listen to him. It's kind of out there, but he believes we are inside of consciousness, meaning we are inside of like a brain. Or you
Okay.
might be able to say like a quantum computer, and that would be like the simulation. Where like just like a computer, when you look at the computer, it shows like a folder tab, but the
Yeah.
folder tab's not really there. When you click on it, it's doing, or if you're, even if you're, a better example would be if you're playing game, excuse me, I'm sick too, but I'm just getting better, but like, so I'm going to be coughing a lot.
Oh no, you're good. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So what's that game? The driving game, Grand Theft Auto. Like if you're playing Grand Theft Auto and you're driving in the car and you have like the glasses on, even though it feels like everything's really there, it's really, as you know, it's really not there. It's inside of the computer, right? So that would
Yeah.
be like idealism. And then there's obviously like panpsychism, which you've probably heard of, which is everything is like conscious to a certain extent. Like even like the small little particles are like kind of barely conscious. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
anyways, the only reason why I'm bringing all this up is because if you believe in materialism, and this is what I've all just gathered recently, then basically, like our brain is conscious because it's wired in such a physical way that there's a term for that too that I'm forgetting, but it's, you might know what the term is, but it's some sort of like term explaining consciousness in the brain, how it becomes conscious. And so, but if you're I honestly don't even know if you're idealist. I don't even know how that would apply to the AI thing, but I know it does. But anyway, so if you're a materialist, meaning that you believe that everything is really physically there, then it's just a matter of like wiring then,
Yeah.
right? That's essentially what I was trying to get to was, so how would you explain that? How would you explain how we make the AI sentient? Is it
Yeah.
just like kind of like the wiring? Is it like you said, after enough of, I don't know, usage or something, and it
Yeah.
eventually becomes sentient, or what?
Yeah, that's a question. I mean, that's a that's something that many people are probably doing entire PhD dissertations on right now. Not sure if I'll be able to solve that question
Yeah.
in afternoon, but I do, I think, agree more with maybe the materialist side point that it is just wiring and how everything's set up. And I think for an artificial intelligence, it's just going to need enough computational power and enough data. I think it could. I think it would work off that way. But realistically, I mean, our brains are just super efficient with how they process information. So perhaps even for an AI, if we can just refine these algorithms and make the code more efficient, you could potentially have AIs running on technology that's available even today.
Yeah,
But
it's weird because it seems like if, like, I don't know enough about it, and you probably know more being like a chemistry major, but like it seems like if we study the brain enough, we could replicate the brain,
yeah, I think that's
right?
generally the idea. But I don't know if you really want to replicate our brain though, because our brain is a product of evolution and it's designed to run on biological hardware. Whereas, I mean, it makes sense to study the brain as a starting point. But I think if you wanted to make an artificial intelligence on a computer, you would really want to design it to take the most advantage of, the hardware it's running, which is a computer versus, our biology.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't really mean like actually like make a brain, what do you call that, like clone a brain, but I mean like if you study the brain enough, it seems like you could understand how the wiring works,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
and
I do
then
think
and then
that's
put that
something to do.
inside a computer.
You mentioned idealism. I think have you ever heard of the concept of a Boltzmann brain?
What was that? What was
Have
it
you ever
called?
heard a Boltzmann brain?
No.
So it's a completely just theoretical idea, but if you're familiar with like in quantum physics, there's always these particles that are coming in and out of existence, and particle antiparticle pairs and annihilating. And there's this idea that if you wait long enough, you could theoretically have structures just appear. If you had an infinite empty universe over an infinite amount of time, everything is guaranteed to just randomly appear. just because those particles can appear and disappear at random. And so there's this idea of a Boltzmann brain, which is that theoretically, your existence could be nothing more than a fully formed human brain just spontaneously popping into existence, thinking that it has experienced an entire lifetimes of events, all just fake, before it pops out of existence. And that there's a crazy idea that maybe that's what the consciousness is and what a existence is. I don't think anyone, when they proposed that theory, actually believe it, but it was more a way just to demonstrate how crazy quantum mechanics can get if you really let it go out over infinite time.
Yeah, I've heard that. Like I've heard someone. It was like, do you know Sean Carroll
I don't think so.
or like Brian Cox?
Oh yes, I do know Brent Cox.
Yeah. So Brian Cox was recently on like most of this information I've honestly gotten from like Joe Rogan's podcast, and it's basically Brian Cox, Sean, and then I branched out to like listen to more of them on other podcasts. So it's not just Joe
Mm-hmm.
Rogan, but it's like um. So it was either Brian Cox or Sean Carroll. I think it was Sean Carroll, who is a I guess he's like a theoretical physicist, but he does quantum physics. Was saying that like in a way, future, like after everything is kind of like dead and gone, kind of like what you were saying, essentially random things will just like appear,
Yeah.
like your face will just appear or whatever, like, and
Mm-hmm.
that's, yeah, I have no clue on how that works, but basically the idea what you were saying is kind of like a random kind of brain would just appear and then just have like a full lifetime of events
Yeah.
inside of its brain,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah. That
could be what we're doing, is what this is essentially, right? I mean,
exactly. And I think the main idea is isn't necessarily that people believe that's the case. It's just saying, hey, this there's no reason this couldn't happen.
yeah, and that would be idealism. And one of the more guy I've talked to recently about, like, I was asking him, does he believe in idealism or materialism? He says idealism, and his theory was, well, not his theory, but I guess his belief was that like if the universe is infinite, which we I guess we think it is, or we think it's, if it's not infinite, it's extremely, vast. And he was saying you travel to like another, like, I thought this was kind of like an interesting theory. If you travel to like another, way, way, way far away, like 100 million, whatever light years away,
Yeah.
and it's literally infinite, then you kind of start to see things repeat. So like
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's like another planet like ours with us on that planet way far away. He was kind of thinking that sounds more like an idealism type thing, I guess, just was the vastness of it all. Like if the universe is so totally vast, I guess the way that I took it was kind of like, how could it all be material? I mean, it could be, but it's like,
Yeah.
I guess it seems like it would be more of an idealism thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, part of the reason why I bring up the consciousness thing is just because I find it really interesting. And when I've talked to a few people about, I didn't even know about idealism. I didn't know about materialism till recently. And then you start to hear about all these different theories, and you're like, wow, like most people don't
Mm-hmm.
even know about these theories. They probably know about them in terms of like, you understood what I was telling you, but like you didn't maybe know the name idealism or materialism, right?
Yeah. That was definitely the case for me.
Yeah. And most people I think don't really, I mean, so I'll be listening, if you're listening to like a podcast in consciousness and they bring up terms like, and there's dualism, which is, I don't know if you know dualism, but that's like basically it's like your body and your mind are like separate. I think it's
Okay.
kind of like more like a soul. Like that'd be like more like a Christian, like
Yeah.
religious thing. Which, I mean, like what naturally makes the most sense to me is like you said, materialism, but then there's a part of, like, I kind of see the, I don't believe in dualism in terms of like we necessarily have a soul,
Yeah.
but I just think my brain is like, there's my body, but then my brain is conscious, so I'm viewing everything from my brain. But anyways,
Absolutely.
let's just stick on the AI first, because I know that that is more your area of expertise. I
Well, the
feel like we
consciousness stuff is cool too. I do like that. I also really like the idea of like mind uploading and stuff like that, or artificial consciousness as an idea going forward as well. I mean, it's a cool topic as a whole.
yeah, yeah. Well, I actually, if I mean, if you wanted to stay on consciousness, it's fine, but that's actually a good probably segue into AI uploading. So, how do you feel about AI uploading? Do you think that that's something that's possible, and like one day we might be able to live forever type thing, or?
So I do think it's possible, but I think there's an issue with it, and perhaps you've thought of this as well, or you've seen people think about it. Is that if you upload your mind to a computer, that is a copy of you, sure, but that is not you. You're still going to be existing in your body, and you're still going to die. This copy of you will now live on in a computer and continue forever, but it doesn't actually make you immortal, just a version of you immortal.
So what do you think that means if there's still you out there, but then there's a copy of you inside of a machine? Would the copy of you be exactly like you?
I think
And
at the beginning it would be like the an instant it's created, you and it are the same thing. But then every second past that point, you're going to naturally start to drift because you have now two consciousness that are experiencing two separate realities, and they're going to diverge over time.
wow, so like at the very beginning, like it's basically you and it are the same thing, essentially thinking the same thoughts. But then as time goes on, it's going to start thinking its own thoughts and become like its own
Absolutely.
being, kind of like similar to if you had like a twin
Yes.
brother, right? Like it, like right out of the womb, you, I don't even know, you may be thinking the same
Yeah.
thoughts, you may not be, but pretty quickly, you probably as like a twin, you would probably pretty quickly be like linking off, maybe, or I don't know, maybe it would be
Yeah.
like very very similar in like the very beginning.
Yeah, but you would start to diverge fairly quickly because, even if you're in the same room, you're experiencing it from a different viewpoint from your twin. So you're always getting a slightly different view of conscience of the world, and you're always going to be doing different things. I think it'd be the same thing with if you uploaded your consciousness to a computer. You're going to experience, it's going to start drifting from you if you have different experiences. Although there is this idea, I read it in a book. It was dealing with this same thought that if you upload your consciousness to a computer, is that you? Because it's a copy of your consciousness. However, they threw a spanner in the works where the process that they use to upload your brain to a computer is a destructive process. It kills you in the process. So, from your perspective, or the consciousness that wakes up, oh, hey,
Hey, what's up?
how's it going? Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Did we just come back to the same
Yeah,
one?
yeah. I don't know where it dropped off. I know I was talking about uploading your mind to a computer.
Yeah, so to start where you were, I think you were saying something about how like when you do this, there's a thing that like destroys,
Hmm.
like I guess the real you.
Yes.
Can you start from the beginning of that if you remember?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this idea that if you upload your brain to a computer, but in the process, the scan of your brain also destroys your brain, so it kills you. Now, there's only one version of you, and it's the uploaded one. So the thought is that still you? Is that still your same consciousness?
Yeah, well, what do you think?
I think likely yes, but the continuity of consciousness is always the question. So it is you, or at least it's a version of you, and it'll definitely think it's you, and it'll be your conscience. So I think for all intents and purposes, yeah, that is you.
So essentially you die, but then your consciousness would just
Live
essentially
on.
live on through that one in, but it would be like fully in a computer simulated world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in terms of the computer simulated world that it's living in now, what's that looking like? Like, are we to a point now with like Meta or whatever where we actually could live in like a virtual world? I mean, is that even possible at this point?
At this point, I don't think so, but I do feel like if you had the technology to be able to scan a mind and upload them onto the computer, you could theoretically. I see no reason why you couldn't create a virtual world to be whatever you want. I mean, it could be paradise.
And so, do you think that that's kind of like what, Mark Zuckerberg's ultimate goal with Meta is to like kind of create that like utopia, like online utopia where even when you die, you can live on?
I don't know if that's his necessarily his goal, but it would not be surprised me if that's what he wanted. I mean, I would love that. That sounds like a great way to exist. And you could even imagine a situation where I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of a matryoshka brain.
No.
It's essentially you can build a Dyson swarm or all these orbital solar collectors around a sun to harvest all the energy from the sun and then use that energy to run simulated consciousness. And you can almost imagine in a really far out future situation or having a civilization where they see life as almost an infancy phase. You're born onto a world, you grow up, you live a life, and then you, at a certain point, download your consciousness, upload your consciousness into this Matryoshka brain, and that's considered almost like the final form of your life. And the existence we have now, the physical existence, might just be a way for, you know, seen as almost like a juvenile period before you're ready to be uploaded.
Yeah, I remember seeing like a while ago, and the first guy that I had on to talk about consciousness, he wrote like a book called Consciousness in a Nutshell. And to be honest with you, I don't even know if that guy knew about like what I'm getting into now about idealism and all this other stuff. Because like when I talked to him, he didn't. He was like kind of talking about consciousness on like a surface level, which is like what most people do, which is fine. But anyways, I remember that was the guy who actually got me into the subject, and then I went on Reddit. I went on the consciousness subreddit, and I like asked somebody to come on. I got a guy from like Saudi Arabia to come on, and he told me about idealism, which I had never heard of, which is just kind of blew my mind. That thought. It's more of like an, I think like an Indian kind of what do you call it? Indian, like their religion.
Hindu
Like
culture.
exactly. Like I think they most of them I think believe in that kind of we live in conscious thing. But anyways, my point is that when I had him on, I had seen this like AI. Somebody typed in to AI like a video, like produce me, like generate like humans evolving from beginning to end or whatever. And it was like, it started off with like monkeys or whatever, then it went through to us, and then it went to, like cyborg, and then it went to like full on machine, and then it
Yeah.
just went to like full on like literal wires, which
I
is
do think
crazy.
I do feel like that's the end goal. I could definitely see a lot of civilizations going that direction. And that's even been proposed as maybe an answer to the Fermi paradox, which if you're familiar with the Fermi paradox,
Yeah, I
yeah,
am.
the idea of where is all the life out there. Some people have proposed that maybe alien civilizations all just eventually reach a point where they decide to upload themselves into a consciousness and just live there. And that's why we don't see, you know, galactic wide civilization.
Like they just, yeah, they go underground, or like they go, yeah, they not literally underground, but or maybe it is underground, like the Matrix, where like
Yeah.
aren't they like kind of like I don't know if it's underground. They're kind of like underground, aren't
I think
they?
so. Yeah. Or they, yeah, they're all like, it's inside. Although I don't think you would probably go underground. I think you would likely, like I said, build orbital infrastructure that would harvest the energy of like a star.
And so you would, if you even needed it to be alive still, your body, which you probably wouldn't, you would literally be orbiting like a star in like a little like hub type thing.
I think you probably would move away from your body at that point, but your
So
consciousness would be distributed through a bunch of satellites orbiting a star.
so what would be orbiting the star? Just like kind of like the mainframe computer type thing that's like
Yeah,
getting
pretty
energy
much.
from it.
Yep. Yep. And you can almost imagine too, you'd probably have multiple shells of these moving further and further away from the star. So any civilization that existed on these computers, it might be the luxury real estate would be able to move your consciousness to the satellites that are closer to the star because they're going to have more energy from the star. They can run the simulation at a higher frame rate. And because the nodes are physically closer together, you have less light delay. So wealthier individuals in the society may move closer into the star and have faster thoughts than the poor people get pushed out into, further orbiting satellites, maybe out toward like, the orbit of like Jupiter or something like that, and have to think much slower because there's not as much energy available to run these simulations, and the satellites are physically further apart, so there's more light delay.
So Elon Musk would be like really close to the star, and Jeff
Yes,
Bezos, and then we'd be like way far away. And then so basically
absolutely.
the closer to the star you are, essentially just the more energy, meaning that like you would never kind of like lose any energy. Like the further away you might like lose some energy at times and like go dark or something, or
Not that you would lose energy, but being closer, you have more energy, meaning you can run the computer at a higher, you can run the computer faster, you can experience reality much faster. And if you're further away from your energy source or you have less energy available, you have to run your computer slower. It'd almost be like turning down your frame rate on a video game, right? If you have an
yeah.
older computer, you turn down the frame rate, or if you have a nicer, faster computer, you can turn up the frame rate, which would be advantageous because if you can run your reality at a higher frame rate, you can think faster than someone else, and you would experience more life. Your subjective time would be much slower. What's a minute of real time might feel like 1,000 years for you if you're up next to the star and able to harness all that energy.
So I mean, so how would that look though in terms of like time being different, kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on how fast you run your, perceived reality, yeah, time would feel different to you. You might be able to experience years of thought in a couple of seconds.
But I mean, like, what does that even mean? Because like, I guess in terms of thought, that would make sense because like, I guess you can think faster, or you can like
Yeah.
live through a life faster. But like, as we know it as humans, like we all kind of only. I've always wondered about that with time, like how they say like time is different, time is
Hmm.
general relative.
Yeah.
Like, how would time look different if, as humans, if like I guess if somebody was traveling close to the speed of light and then we're here on Earth, we would feel time as normal, right? Like
Yes.
just like it is right now. But how would the person who's experiencing time faster,
So
like
they
what
would,
would that feel like?
to
You know
them,
what I
it would
mean?
also feel completely normal. They would not feel any different, anything. But if you were an outside observer looking at them, it would look like they were moving very slow. But for them, it would feel very normal.
But I mean, what does it change then? Like I've never really understood that. Like would they age faster? Like what is the difference if it feels the same to them? Why is time changing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So as you approach the speed of light, you do reach, like you were talking about, with a time dilation where time starts to move slower. And there's a lot of really good explanations for this. One of my favorites is if you imagine you have like an atomic clock and you have a photon bouncing between two plates. Since the speed of light is fixed, if you start moving that clock, the photon has to take a longer path, so it appears to move slower. So the clock ticks slower, and that's a kind of why you have these time dilations as you approach the speed of light. As for what it would feel like if you were on a ship going 99.999% the speed of light, maybe trying to travel to a new solar system, it might be a 50-year trip, or 100-year trip or something like that. But to you, it might only feel like it takes 1 year, and it would just feel like 1 year of normal time.
So time or like everything would still feel normal,
Yes.
but like you would just in one day traveling at the speed of light, it might be 50 days here on Earth.
Yes, exactly. And if
But
you were
you
on
wouldn't.
Earth observing this person, they would just look like they're moving very slow.
So like my big question, because I've always wondered this with time, I've always been fascinated with time, and I had one guy on to talk about like he was actually like he actually believed it. He believed in young Earth creationism.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that like the Earth was like literally created in 7 days and or whatever 7,000. I don't even know. The Earth is 7,000 years old or whatever. And so I had him on to debate that, but then I ended up like getting on to time with him. But I don't know why I'm randomly going over like old podcasts, but like it just reminds me of stuff that I went. But anyway, so I asked him. I ended up asking him about time because he was like an interesting guy, and I guess it was related to that subject. And so yeah, what is time to you? Like I don't really even understand. So like here's how I look at time. Just like the consciousness thing, I don't know much about it, but I try to explain it. But in terms of time, we're traveling around the sun. And so when we travel around the sun one time, that's a year, that's 365 days. And then we spin, that's one day.
Yeah.
But in terms of time, that's kind of like relative to us. Time in terms of like the arrow of time, or just time in a natural, like what does that even mean?
So
You know
for
what I
me,
mean?
yeah, the way, and this is actually funny you mentioned this because this is where I came up with the name of my podcast, Entropy Rising. I define time, or at least I think of time in terms of entropy. You can define or the way I define a state of later time is it is a point in the universe where there is a greater amount of entropy than there was before that. So I define times in terms of time is nothing but increased entropy.
And so I'm actually glad that you bring this up because I recently did like an AI video on entropy, explaining entropy from the AI's perspective, and I still don't understand entropy. I don't understand it when it gets explained to me. So it basically, if I were to explain it, I'd say if something falls, like you drop a glass, the glass and it falls, it's gonna shatter apart. It's
Mm-hmm.
not gonna like be the opposite where it like comes up and comes back together. So that's basically what entropy is to a certain extent, right? Like everything's kind of slowly degrading, falling apart. But
Yeah,
how?
that's a good way to think of it.
I mean, if you have a better way of explaining entropy, that would be great. But also, how does entropy? What was the terminology used? To
Define
explain,
time.
yeah,
Well, one of the
entropy
I'm
rising, or
Entropy Rising. Yeah, the name of the podcast.
but I mean, in
Uh,
terms of time, how are you able to calculate time based on entropy?
so one of the characteristics of entropy is that it always increases in our universe through time. So if you go forward in time, that is a state in the universe where there is more entropy. And if you look backwards in time, that is a state in the universe where there was less entropy. And right now we have no way, or as far as we know, there's no way to reverse entropy to make to go from a higher entropy state to a lower entropy state in the universe. Because if you could reverse entropy, you also essentially have discovered time travel.
But I mean, in terms, I mean, this is like really, it's like kind of going beyond what I know, but I mean, it's hard for me to like even like understand it. But it's like in terms of time. Okay, so in terms of entropy, yeah, how do you define entropy?
One of the nice ways to think about it is, like you said, almost like it's a measure of disorder. And a great example that you will hear about if you take any like physics or chemistry courses is imagine you have a box and you put a wall in this box and you compress all of the air into it. So on one side, there's a lot of high pressure air, and on the other side, there's a vacuum. That would be said to be a high entropy state because on the one side, all of the atoms are all in one place, they're all collected into one place. So if you remove that wall, we all naturally know what's going to happen. All of the molecules are going to spread out through the box and reach a point where they're evenly distributed and randomly distributed. At that point, it's a lower entropy state. So I think of it like an energy curve. It's almost like being on a hill. All things roll downhill because of gravity. Entropy is almost like that with order and energy in the universe.
Okay, so in terms of explaining it maybe a little bit more simpler for me, like even though that was simple, but like I said, when I drop the glass, it breaks. That's kind of like the easiest way of like kind of understanding it from like a day to day,
Yeah. Or
right?
if you put a drop of dye in water and you wait, eventually it'll disperse through all the water instead of just staying in one area.
But like, why does that necessarily make it entropy that it disperses?
Because entropy is a measure of disorder. So if you have if you put like a drop of water, or if you put a drop of dye in water, and that dye were to just stay in one tiny little area and not just distribute itself, it is in a more ordered state. And because entropy always increases, it wants to become in a more disordered state. So it's going to naturally disperse and throughout the water.
Okay, so in terms of that, how would you measure time through entropy? Like, what's a way of doing that?
I don't know if you could necessarily measure time through entropy. Maybe you can. Maybe some physicists can answer that. But you could use you entropy defines the arrow of time. You know time is moving forward if entropy is increasing.
Okay, so in terms of like the subatomic clock, like when I use my clock, it's basically just on the regular, like I was saying, the Earth going around
Mm-hmm.
the sun and then it also rotating. If to use like a physicist clock or an atomic clock, how does that measure time?
Uh, do you mean like physically how it measures time, or are you talking about just in related to entropy?
Um,
Because a lot of
like
atomic clocks work through like I think they usually use cesium, and they measure because it vibrates at a very specific rate, and that's how a lot of atomic clocks work, like cesium clocks work, similar to how
is that
quartz works.
is that measuring time in terms of um entropy, like what you're saying, or is that just kind of like measuring time in the way that we know it?
As measuring time in the way that we know it, you if you know that a cesium atom oscillates or vibrates 130 something thousand times a second, I can't remember the exact rate. You can count how many times it's oscillated and then denote that as a second.
So the second is linked up to what we know as a second, which is essentially um I don't even how do we even define like a second? How do we even come to the second?
Yeah,
Like
the second is just it's completely arbitrary and man-made. We divided our day based on how fast our planet spins, and then we had to subdivide that, and we decided to do it in terms of hours and seconds. Completely arbitrary.
so the hours are totally arbitrary, the minutes are totally arbitrary, and the seconds are totally arbitrary. But the thing that's not arbitrary is the day and the year, right?
To us. And another thing that's not arbitrary would be something like the vibrational oscillations of a cesium atom, which is what atomic clocks use. Because if you were to, for example, if you wanted to define how you count time to an alien who doesn't speak your language, might not understand anything from you, one of the ways you might try to denote that is to depict a cesium atom and then show, how you count, how many oscillations of that atom are used to count your day, be a way to link time to like a physical constant that's not just basis, because days and years are all based on how our planet orbits our sun, but a different alien species is going to have a different day length and a different orbital period for their planet.
So how is the cesium atom linked to our understanding of the day or the year?
Oh, it's not that it's linked to our understanding of the day or the year. It's we use it as a way to measure time very accurately, because it so the atoms can oscillate, and they will do so at an exact rate. And so if you count how many times it oscillates, you can use that as a clock. It's the same way also a lot of watches, they'll use quartz. It has a piezoelectricity effect, where if you apply electronic current through quartz, it'll vibrate at a very exact frequency. So you can count those vibrations and then use that to measure time. And then, break that up however you want, seconds, days, whatever.
Okay. I feel like I'm getting way off on a tangent here, but and we'll go back to the original thing, but I've always just wanted to understand this, and I can't really quite get my finger on it the same way that I can't with like quantum physics and superposition and all that. But so in terms of the way that we understand time and we measure it, whether we measure it through the atom oscillating or the day or the year, um, how is that different than like you know entropy's measurement of time? Like, is there another way to measure time based on entropy?
Not that I'm aware of, no, but that you're in if you could somehow measure all the entropy in the universe, you could say that when there's more entropy in the universe, that is a later point in time than a same measurement if there's less entropy.
But
How you would actually do that, I don't know.
are we able to do that to measure
No.
entropy?
Well, not like that. No, not on the universe scale, especially.
No, no. So in terms of well, one last thing I'll say regarding this, and then we can go back to the AI futurism thing. Sorry.
All good.
Um, is yeah. So Sean Carroll on the Joe Rogan podcast, he said because he wrote a book called The Arrow of Time, and he was saying that the way that we measure, as you probably know, being a chemist, the way that we measure temperature is by like when things are moving around each other faster, it gets hotter. When things are moving around each other slower, it gets colder.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was saying the same thing for time. The only way to measure time is if something is basically going like around something else. So like if we weren't going around, it was something like that. I might be getting this wrong, but like if we weren't going around the sun, there would be no way for us to measure time. Would you agree with that? Like if we were just kind of floating through.
Well, yeah, if you were just consciously like floating in a dark void and you had no outside reference points, it'd be impossible to gauge how much time has passed. I mean, we see that if you put people in isolation, they very quickly lose any sense of time.
Yeah. But so basically time doesn't really mean too much beyond what we count it as, right? Like yes, you maybe one day we'll be able to figure out how entropy is rising, and therefore we'll be able to measure time, but it probably won't even really matter because that's on the basis of the universe, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to be able to reverse entropy, because then you could maybe avoid the heat death of the universe. But I'm sure we'll keep studying it, and hopefully we'll have a better understanding of why entropy must increase and why that's a law of our universe.
Well, do you think that we'll one day be able to stop entropy from rising? And if we do, would that mean that like things suddenly kind of go back together as opposed to like kind of falling apart? Like we almost would de-age at that point?
If you could control entropy, you would basically unlock the entire universe. You could have unlimited free energy. You could basically live forever. You could do everything. I mean, it is at that point you just have mastery over the universe, because if you can control the physical constants of the universe, you control everything. So I don't necessarily think we're ever going to be able to do that, though. I think it's probably a hard set law in our universe for whatever reason. So I don't think we'll ever get mastery of entropy. Same way as I don't think we'll ever be able to go faster than the speed of light.
Do you think gravity is a hard set law too?
Oh yeah, gravity is, but gravity is a tricky one. Gravity is one of the least understood forces out there.
Yeah, then there's like I've heard like the whole like quantum. Have you heard of like quantum gravity?
Yes, so we don't have a model to explain how gravity works in the quantum level. We have a great model to explain gravity on a universe scale, but we don't have a great model for quantum gravity, and we don't have any way to link our understanding of gravity on a large scale to gravity on a small scale. That is one of the mysteries of physics that hopefully will be solved in our lifetimes.
So what that means, sorry, I just have question upon question upon
Oh, you're
question
good.
here. I could probably like talk more about like the futurism thing, but with the science stuff, um, in terms of the gravity, I've just wondered what quantum gravity means. It's hard for me to understand this stuff even in definition form. But so basically, we understand what gravity is doing, which is essentially exerting a force on a mass, which that's actually not even what it's doing, right? It's actually according to general relativity, it's actually what do you call it?
It's curving space time. Yeah.
It's curving space time. But basically, by saying that that's not happening on the, we don't understand what's happening on the quantum gravity level. That means like with small little particles, we don't understand how gravity is affecting the small little particles.
It's not that we don't understand how it's affecting the particles. It's that most forces have a force carrier. Light, for example, has the proton and all of these. So we don't know if there is a force carrier for gravity. Hypothetically, they've come up with a name of them called gravitons. We don't know if those exist. There's no confirmation if they do or they don't, and we don't know how gravity works really. Like we don't, to a quantum level, understand how it works. Or a good way to
Well,
put it is, we know that an atom how an atom is made up. And we know that if you zoom into the nucleus of an atom, it's got protons and neutrons. If you zoom into those protons and neutrons, you get quarks. We don't know how to do that with gravity.
by that meaning, like, well, what do you mean by a carrier?
So hmm. So there's like quantum particles or there's subatomic particles that make things up. Right now, as far as we know, we don't know if any of those exist for gravity, or if they
Okay,
do,
so
we haven't discovered them.
from my like my basic way of understanding this is basically saying that like we don't know how gravity is working on like um microscopic levels.
Yeah, we don't understand it to that point. We have a great understanding of gravity on a universe scale, on a planet scale, but not on a subatomic scale.
So basically those small little particles are essentially like not maybe they're just like not affected by gravity, like they're doing their own thing.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, could we kind of like just say that like could we kind of just say that like oh like they're just they have their own laws of whatever
Well,
they're
so
doing.
it's kind of like if you think back to
uh,
a couple hundred years ago with light, we didn't understand that there's a photon, which is actually the particle of light that carries light. We didn't know what that was. We knew light was a thing that existed, and we could see how it interacted with things, but we didn't understand what light was. So it wasn't until relatively recently that we discovered what a photon is, and that light has this weird characteristic where it can be a particle in a wave. We have not had that similar breakthrough with gravity yet.
okay. Um and then one I'm so sorry, but I'm just like so curious about all this stuff, and it's like you're like somebody who understands it, so you can explain it to me. But one last question would be like the guy that I had on recently that was talking about consciousness. He was saying how we can only measure time coming to us and then away from us, or the opposite, going away from us and then back to us, right? Or
Yeah.
not time. Sorry, not time light.
Okay.
Does that make that about that, right?
I think I understand what he's talking about.
I think he was trying to use it in a way like I don't even really know what he was trying to use it in a way to explain maybe some consciousness we don't understand or something. But like, do you understand why we can't measure time? We have to like take it like going away from us and then back to us and then divide that by two. Do you know why that works that way?
He might be talking about some of the early experiments that went with trying to measure the speed of light, where they were trying to basically shine a light and then see if there was a delay from when they held up the light to when the light came back to them. Some of the earliest experiments used a method like that. And the reason they had to divide it by two is because they were shining a light essentially at a mirror. So it traveled that distance and then reflected and traveled that distance back to them. So that's why they were dividing it by two. I think that might be one of the experiments he was referencing, maybe.
But like, are we not doing that anymore? Can we measure light just coming one way, one direction?
Um, I don't know what tools they use to measure lights anymore. I think we use interferometers now to measure light.
Okay, sorry. We went way far away from the original thing, was which was us traveling around the sun in pods, which, which is also, we'll go back to like the stuff that's like more understandable and like sci-fi. Even though I could have you on and like ask you all these science questions, but it's let's keep to the AI futurism. So that's essentially how you see us in the future. You think we'll be essentially, ideally in your mind, living in pods traveling around the sun, and
If
we'll
even, or
each,
just fully uploaded.
what do you mean fully uploaded?
No body at that point, just a conscious existing on a computer is one of the futures I could definitely foresee either humanity pursuing or maybe some other alien civilizations out there may have pursued.
And it would literally just be living in a pod, but it would be living inside some sort of simulation on the pod. What do you think, that all the simulations would be linked up to each other so that we could like still live with each other? Or do you think that we'd have our own little like
I think it could be whatever you wanted it to be. If you wanted to have your own private experience, you could do that. Or if you wanted to have a communal experience with other uh, consciousness, uploaded consciousness, you could do that. I think it would be both.
is there no way of doing this just on Earth? Like what, like would we be able to like bring the sun's energy to us as opposed to going to
Oh yeah,
it?
you could absolutely do that. You could build some orbital collectors around the sun, similar to like a Dyson swarm or a Dyson sphere, probably swarm, and you could beam that energy to Earth using something like microwaves to a solar collection system around Earth's orbit, and then transfer that energy back to the surface of Earth if you wanted to. You would still need to build all the orbital infrastructure to collect all the sun, all the starlight, but yeah, you could beam that back to Earth, and we will probably start doing that at some point in the future, anyways, just to get more energy to our planet.
Well, I mean, we're already obviously using solar power, but right now, is it kind of like too too mild to be doing what you're talking about? Like the solar power we're using now isn't strong enough.
I mean, it could be, but if you want to make the most of your star, right? I mean, that's a bunch of free energy out there. Our sun only, our planet is pretty minuscule. It only soaks up a small percentage, a small percentage of a percent of the our star's total output. So if you want to make the most of that energy, you're going to have to go into space and start building basically solar panels that orbit the sun and collect all of that energy that we're missing out on. That's just getting shot out into space.
And that's what you mean by like a Dyson sphere, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or a Dyson. So a Dyson sphere is, it's this artificial megastructure where you basically enclose a sun in a sphere, which is not probably what you would do. You would probably do something more similar to a Dyson swarm, which is just orbiting, or like basically a bunch of satellites, and you would have them orbiting the star in shells. And from an outside perspective, if you fully built one of these out, there wouldn't be a single photon of light emitted by our sun that makes it out of our solar system. It would all be collected somewhere.
But what happens if, well, for one, why would you choose to be orbiting the sun when you could just be on Earth? And then two, if you are orbiting the sun in some sort of, I guess hub would be the best word, right? Like what happens if some like meteor comes and hits you, or like, or
Yeah.
or you get too close, or something bad happens and you get too close to the sun and it, you
So
know.
I think your question for two is actually my answer for one. One of the reasons you would probably choose to do this is because you can distribute your consciousness across multiple nodes, so that if a meteor or something fails, it'd be similar to like having a small brain injury today. It might take out a couple of neurons, but you're fine as long as it doesn't hit anything critical. So the more nodes you can distribute yourself across, the safer you are. And why would you not do it on the planet? There could be multiple reasons for it, but one big one would be that's a single point of failure. What happens if a meteor hits Earth? So you're much safer to have this cloud system, basically a cloud-based system around the sun, where your consciousness is distributed across thousands of nodes, so you don't have a single point of failure.
What do you mean by thousands of nodes? Like you would literally have multiple hubs then, like you floating around the sun?
Yeah, so you would probably have millions, even billions of these orbital collectors, and they could all have computers on them that are helping to run artificial intelligences. Or, well, I don't know if it's artificial intelligence, if it's an uploaded mind, but yeah, essentially you can have a bunch of satellites. They all have computational centers, and they all do their part in hosting and supporting uploaded minds.
Yeah, sounds. Oh man, sounds crazy. So we've gone about as far out as well. How long do you think before that's like realistic? For one, and then two, at that point of this happening, would there be any real humans left, or would we all just be inside of this simulation?
Yeah, you could 100% just completely go into the simulation, but I think likely people are going to still exist. But that might be seen as almost like a second step. Once you've lived to a certain age, maybe you upload your mind to continue life and as an uploaded consciousness. Or some people would probably choose not to, but I think a lot of people would. And as far as how long we are from that, I have honestly no idea on the uploading mind front. If that's possible, it's probably a long way out. As for being the Dyson swarm, I think that we're probably going to start building orbital solar collectors. I would not be surprised to see that happening in our lifetimes, getting started in the baby stages of this. And it's just going to be a matter of when does it get cheaper to collect solar energy from space and send it back to Earth versus building solar farms on Earth, because you've only got so much land that you can use solar on Earth.
So I mean, what are we talking? Like how many years? I mean, this almost sounds like way kind of in the future. Like I mean, I would
uh,
say at least 100 years, depending on how quick the singularity happens, right? How like
yeah, for the uploading consciousness, I think probably past our lifetimes before we have that type of technology. But it's also almost impossible. Well, not almost. It is impossible to predict because technology doesn't increase at a nice steady rate. It's an exponential, and then also there's all these breakthrough moments that either completely speed up or change the path of technological progress. So trying to predict when something's going to happen, I almost feel like it's a fool's errand.
And do you feel like this is kind of almost, it sounds like you're for it, but do you think that there's some element of this that's like kind of like dystopian, like that could be like Black Mirror, where it could like we could think it's a great thing that we're doing this, but like really it ends up kind of backfiring?
Um, Saying I'm for it. I like to talk about these things. I talk about a lot of things, even if I'm not for them, just because I think they're like almost an interesting thought experience, thought process. Though I am for uploading minds to computers because it means you can live forever. As for can this go wrong? Oh yeah, this can go really wrong in a lot of ways. I mean, if you have an artificially uploaded consciousness, you could potentially make them suffer in unimaginable ways for eternity. So there's definitely things that can go wrong, and there's definitely ways this could be a bad thing. Hopefully, we are able to not experience that, but we definitely should be mindful going forward, especially when we start uploading our minds. You mentioned Black Mirror. I think they actually had a whole episode dedicated to the types of suffering that can happen if you're an uploaded consciousness.
The one I'm thinking of is the Jesse Plemons one, where he was like kind of he was like intentionally trying to create like horrible simulations for people or something.
Yeah, that's absolutely something you can do. And I mean, you could also make several copies of a person and put them through several different types of horrible simulations. And, you could be suffering on an unimaginable level. So hopefully
Yeah.
that's something we never experience.
Yeah, it goes back to that thing with your original thing with what you said, which would be like the God, the AI, not God, but the AI emperor or whatever. And with that type of thing, or also with this type of thing, or even just like with space travel, like SpaceX is doing with Mars and all that, you almost have to get it to a point where like it's almost like everything is almost like perfectly set up. As if it's not, then essentially people could die or people could get really like hurt, and that's obviously bad. But I mean, so yeah, in terms of going like we've gone like really kind of far out in terms of going back to like now and like the more like kind of realistic future, which I guess would be within our lifetime. What do you see happening next? So right now we're kind of at like what, like the LLM
Yeah.
stage, and then what do you feel like is the next big step to get that one guy? So that one guy that I had on talking about consciousness and other stuff, he actually had his own company where like I hate to say this on here, but it's like I believe him, but he was saying that he had like his own company, and I was like, "What does your company do?" and he was saying they're trying to predict the future, and he was saying the next step is literally that, which is trying to predict the future. And then he was also saying the next step is kind of like time. I guess he was saying like AIs have a hard time calculating time. So would you say you agree with him on that? Like the next step might be trying to predict the future and then
Well,
also understanding time from an AI's perspective.
um, trying to predict the future is, I think people have been trying to do that for all of humanity, and not something I think you could actually achieve.
You don't
The
think so?
No, I don't think so. It's almost dystopian if you can predict the future, though, because that probably implies there's no such thing as free will if you can accurately predict the future.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on. Well, one thing that I was going to ask him that I didn't get around to is, I guess it depends on how far ahead can you predict the
Hmm.
future, which is like let's just say you can predict like an hour, then maybe, but then it's like once you are able to predict the future, that would completely. It's almost like that would like say that there is no free will, but then it would also be like things would constantly be changing because we're predicting the future, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So like if we knew what was going to happen tomorrow, suddenly everybody would be like scrambling to do something different, right? Which would essentially immediately change again and again and again, right?
Yeah, I can't remember. I read a book one time where I think the main protagonist had that ability. He could predict the future, but the minute he acted on that prediction, it changed it. Or even the fact that he knew the future also meant it could change it. Because if you do predict the future and then the minute you change anything, right, then the future you predicted is now not the future that's going to happen.
Yeah, I hate to say this on here, but I mean, I doubt he actually will listen to this, but if he does, so you don't think that like he is correct on that. You don't think he'll succeed in predicting the future.
Yeah,
Not
that I
only
mean,
him,
hey,
but any of us.
if he does succeed, he'll be a very wealthy person. That's so I'm sure he'll be fine. But I think our next
Yeah.
steps is going to be something like artificial general intelligence, AGI, which I'm sure many people have probably heard of this, which is the idea of an artificial intelligence that isn't super focused on anything. Right now we have LLMs, these large language models that are a fixated artificial type of intelligence, where it's good at one thing and one thing only, and that's mimicking human language. Artificial general intelligence would be good at doing all sorts of different things. You can hand it all kinds of different tasks. And at that point, you're really approaching almost like a consciousness level of an entity. And my guess is if you do ever have an AGI, even if it's not conscious, I think it's going to appear almost like it has a consciousness.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then. So let's just say in a year, which Sam Altman says will have AGI. What do you think that's gonna look like?
I think it will appear almost to a lot of people. It will appear as if it is conscious, even if it is not. And what will that look like? You're gonna have AI being able to do a lot of different jobs that it's is currently not able to, and you're gonna have AI starting to be more of a to be able to create things and new unique thoughts, new ideas, maybe even working on the theory side of a lot of physics and stuff like that.
And then when do you think we'll start to like? Will this still be kind of like how LLMs are? Like, do you think all this will still be kind of inside a computer? Like, it'll still be us typing to the AGI, or do you think it's like soon we'll actually see robots with AGI like kind of walking around?
I mean, if you did have an AGI, it would you could potentially run it. It still will be ran on a computer somewhere, and then have it use peripherals like a robot or a robotic arm, even like a full humanoid robot if you wanted to. I don't think it really makes sense necessarily to try to fit all the computational needs that you would need to run an AGI into a small form factor like a robot, if that makes sense. Better to have it remote control it and safer.
So you think that there will be a robot out there, but you'll be remote controlling it from the computer, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to have like an automated worker, maybe a robot that does a dangerous job that you don't want someone to do, it needs it to have some level of autonomy, then it would make sense, to have, if you had AGI and you wanted AGI in it, to run that on a server and have it remote control the robot to go do this job.
Yeah. So like kind of like a firefighter or a
Yeah,
cop or something, and we can
yeah,
just
something
have
like that.
yeah. Well, I mean, how soon do you think we are to like the realistics of like an actual fully functioning robot? Like, what do you think about Elon Musk's robots that he had at that like this, what was it, the Cybertruck event or something, or what? Or no, the Robotaxi event.
Yeah, yeah. They were very impressive. I know that they were being controlled by people, which I think they were trying to kind of keep that under the rug. They weren't necessarily lying to people, but they were trying to imply that these things were fully autonomous when they weren't. But how close are we to robots? I mean, we already have them. If you've seen Boston Dynamics, theirs are absolutely crazy. I think they just released a new video a couple weeks ago showing where they are with their bipedal robot, and it's really good and it's really almost more nimble than a person at this point.
Yeah, it's like people say that like we have them ready, and maybe we do, or maybe we don't. But it's like I mean, like when they're fully, like you're just gonna see them walking down the street all the time, or like a normal thing.
I think we'll probably see that in the next decade.
Okay, and then what about like completely autonomous vehicles? When do you think that's like when you like? I'm an Amazon Flex driver. I'm a delivery driver. So when do you think that job will completely be taken over by autonomous vehicles? And then I don't know if they would have robots like delivering the item. Like how soon do you think that's happening?
So I could see that also happening in the next decade or two. The issue with autonomous vehicles, though, I think is going to be less of a software or a. I think we're going to reach the point that we can technologically achieve this well before we get the regulatory approval to do it. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback, in governments to really make sure these things are safe, and I think that's going to slow down the progress a lot further.
Yeah, I mean in general, I've heard I don't know if it was Elon Musk himself who said this or like, but I think that they were saying that like autonomous vehicles actually are supposed to be safer than human drivers. So
Oh
even
yeah.
though it'll be like if a robot car or whatever you want to call it like kills someone, I think everyone will like freak out. But
Hmm.
it's still supposed to be more safe than like human drivers, right?
Oh
At
yeah,
this point.
absolutely. Yes, and I mean, the thing is though, you need it to be so much more safe than humans for people to accept it. It has to be a case of it being, you know, several orders of magnitude safer than a person, I think, before people are going to feel comfortable handing over control and allowing these things on the streets.
Yeah. And so you think that like we're probably to the point within the decade that could happen, but it might not just due to kind of like laws and stuff and like
Yeah, I could see there being some
politics.
regulatory red tape for those for sure. But I will say this, especially before we end up getting off here, because I know people are worried about their jobs with AI. That's obviously a really big fear for many people. Um, one of the things that I always think about with this new future we're going toward is that in the early 1900s and late 1800s, almost all jobs in America were related to agriculture. I think it was 80 or 90% of jobs were related to agriculture in some way, shape, or form. And so if you went back to this time period and you told people in 100 years, less than 2% of agricultural jobs are still going to be around, I think most people would assume that means the future is going to be full of economic hardship and collapse and unemployment, where obviously we're living in that future now. And we know that it's ended up being fine. New sectors were created, new jobs were created, people found other things to do, and people are pretty happy that they don't have to work on a farm. So I am optimistic that that's also the future we're going to see with AI. We're scared it's going to take our job, but I think it's going to open way more doors than it closes.
Yeah. So in terms of making money, like so since the LLMs came out, like I've had a YouTube channel for a while, wasn't able to get monetized. I have done like podcasts and like, filming, at the beach or the forest or whatever. But anyways, so like when LLMs came out, I was like, why don't I use this tool? And like I started doing videos using the LLMs where I like,
Mm-hmm.
have it basically give me like a script and then I, basically use like an AI voice to read it. And then I'll use videos and pictures. And I've my YouTube channel has, done a lot better in terms of monetization. So in terms of like that kind of thing, what are some areas that people can kind of like make money on their own, kind of like passive income type stuff, or even just full time jobs? How do you think the job landscape will change? Like what should people like look to be doing in the next, I guess five, soon, basically with in the next year?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm not the best person to ask with that one. I am not a business person at all. I would say that, the best, really the only thing you can do is try to look at your job and think, can an artificial intelligence do this? If so, how can I try to prevent that? And definitely try to, leverage these technologies to your own advantage. Use ChatGPT and these other LLMs in your own work if you can find a way to do it, just to try to stay caught up with what's going on around you.
Yeah, one thing that I'm like really impressed with is not only the LLMs, but all one thing that I'm not impressed with the LLMs is they do seem, especially like Google Gemini and even ChatGPT will get stuff wrong a decent amount.
Oh
I've
yeah.
actually started using like I don't know if you know about like Perplexity.
Hmm.
Um, but I've started using that one because I think that one actually kind of like refers to specific sources, whereas I think Gemini and ChatGPT tend to kind of like actually think on its own. But the
Yeah.
Perplexity one seems to get stuff wrong less than the other ones.
Hmm. Um,
Didn't
I, I was gonna say I will have to get off here, so I think we might want to wrap up.
okay. Okay. Is there anything that you wanted to go over in the next whatever however long we have that we didn't cover? Because I didn't know exactly, yeah, like what you want to talk about in terms of AI. We probably should have went over that before, but anything you want to go over before we wrap up in terms of
Uh,
whatever.
no, I don't really have any specifics. If if anyone enjoyed what we're talking about, we've got our own podcast over at Entropy Rising. But yeah, I think we had a good conversation, and I think I said all the stuff I wanted to on these topics.
Okay, sounds good. So the last, if I can just ask you one last question before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, would be like I'm still kind of confused on the superposition thing in terms of quantum mechanics, and I think that like relates to chemistry, right? So if you're just able to kind of like explain to me like the superposition where like the things are the particles are moving and all that.
Um, oh man, digging back into my physical chemistry course. I got to be honest, I don't fully, I'm not the best at understanding the quantum side of things with superpositions and stuff like that. It's been a couple of years since I took those courses, and I kind of forget the finer details of how those work, if I'm being
Okay,
honest with you.
no problem. I mean, to be honest with you, it would probably be too long to explain. I just wanted to ask that one question. But okay, so the last thing that I'll ask everybody is like obviously plug your podcast again, and then either music, movies, TV shows, other podcasts that you listen to that like you think are just helpful for information regarding this kind of stuff or anything. If you could go over that, and then we'll just wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we record our podcast called Entropy Rising. It's available on all the platforms you can find podcasts, as well as YouTube. But if you like this type of stuff that I'm talking about and you're interested in it, I can also recommend Isaac Arthur's podcast. Not that he needs the publicity from me; he's much bigger, but he does a lot of great stuff with science and futurism. It's a very interesting channel. And if you like science fiction, I've been reading Alistair Reynolds' Revelation Space series is really cool. I think people should consider giving those books a read if they enjoy realistic science fiction.
Okay, sounds good. And yeah, I always ask. I know that like I think some people are like, "Why do you want me to plug other people's stuff?" But it's like I'm
Oh,
always
I'm
kind of
sorry.
like, uh,
Your mic cut out
I,
for a second.
oh, I always ask that just because I think some people might think like, why is he asking me to plug other people's stuff? But it's like I'm always looking for like new podcasts and information to listen to. So it's like I figured I might as well throw that in there. And then
Uh,
lastly, you guys are on YouTube. Do you guys have video on there? Like or is it just audio on YouTube?
I'm sorry. Your mic cut out there for a little bit. I heard you ask the YouTube question. I don't know if you asked anything else about.
Oh no, it was just yeah, on YouTube. Is it just like the audio, or do you guys have any graphics, or is it just kind of audio?
The YouTube is just audio. We do not record video as of right now. We also have some shorts where we cut up the episode and make it into shorts, but it's mostly just the audio only podcast on YouTube.
Okay, sweet, thanks. And then if yeah, I'll just yeah, okay. Thanks for coming on. I'll ask you something else after, and then yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yep. All right. Bye. Let me just